working mom. And she goes, it can be incredibly overwhelming. Oh my gosh, I just need a break.
Wow.
And then we find out she's had a full-time nanny for 5 years.
What?
Who takes the kids to school.
What do you guys do at home?
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
For years, Meghan Markle has managed her public image with the precision of a Hollywood director. Every headline, every camera angle, every supposed candid moment felt carefully designed, each frame part of an ongoing production titled The Perfect Life. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the world turned away, what really unfolded behind those mansion walls? According to one woman who says she was there, a nanny who lived inside that quiet California home, the fairy tale wasn't what the world was told. Her story isn't another round of royal gossip. It's the voice that, for years, no one was meant to hear. She claims that working inside the Sussex residence felt less like childcare and more like surviving inside a finely tuned illusion. There were rules, some peculiar, others unnervingly strict. The atmosphere, she said, could swing from professional calm to silent tension without warning. The smiles looked practiced. The compassion speeches outside never quite matched the stillness within. She recalls reading the job description and hesitating. It didn't sound like an ordinary nanny post. It read more like a casting notice. Every line chosen with care. Every requirement strangely personal. The candidate had to be discreet, adaptable, invisible. Translation, she remembers thinking. They want someone capable, but not noticeable. Rumors among agencies whispered that Meghan disliked hiring people who could outshine the brand. Appearance, social presence, even relationship status were reportedly examined with a microscope. Those with families of their own were seen as distractions. Those in relationships were considered risky. The message seemed clear. Your entire life must orbit around theirs. From the start, professionalism wasn't enough. It demanded devotion. Flexibility didn't mean flexible hours. It meant loyalty, immediate availability, and unquestioned obedience. Privacy became a luxury no one could claim. The boundaries between employer and employee blurred into something far more personal and far more monitored. Before even stepping into the home, candidates had to agree to conditions that raised eyebrows. All interactions would be observed, they were told. Later, she realized how literal that line truly was. The hiring process unfolded like a 3-act audition. First, an agency interview, then a secondary meeting with one of Meghan's assistants. Only after signing a strict, non-disclosure agreement could the applicant finally meet the couple themselves. When the nanny finally arrived at the Sussex property, she expected a warm interview. Instead, she found herself inside what felt like a live audition. The house was immaculate, almost museum-like, but eerily quiet, as if sound itself had been instructed to behave. She was told to behave naturally, tend to her trial tasks, and relax. What she didn't know was that every move was being recorded. Hidden cameras documented how she walked, how she smiled, even how she paused to think. Later, she'd be told this wasn't standard security. It was Meghan's method of studying energy. Those who appeared too confident were labeled difficult. Those too quiet were considered dull. The goal wasn't simply finding the best caregiver. It was finding someone who could blend seamlessly into a pre-written world. When the final interview began, Meghan's questions struck her as psychological tests rather than professional ones. How do you handle being corrected? She asked. How do you respond when someone misinterprets your intentions? Each inquiry felt like a quiet probe for emotional obedience. The message underneath was unmistakable. This wasn't a family seeking help. It was a brand seeking control. The agency itself allegedly warned the applicants beforehand. You won't be told whose home this is. They prefer to test comfort levels before revealing their names. Only later would the nanny realize why such secrecy mattered, because the real audition wasn't for a job. It was for access to a kingdom built on privacy and image. By day's end, she no longer felt like she'd met a household. She'd stepped into a carefully directed set where every player served one producer. From the outside, the Sussexes seemed united, two rebels forging their path beyond palace rules. But inside the walls, differences quietly simmered. Harry, shaped by structure and duty, favoured a traditional approach. He reportedly pushed for a Norland nanny, trained, discreet, and steeped in royal standards. For him, that meant safety and stability. Meghan, by contrast, wanted something modern, Californian, image-friendly. No uniform, no stiff protocol. Someone stylish, media-savvy, fluent in the rhythm of her new world. What might have been a simple debate over parenting became, in truth, a battle of identities, heritage versus reinvention. The tension between their worlds hung like perfume, polite but palpable. Harry would reference his mother's warmth. Meghan countered with the need for privacy. Both loved their children, but loved them differently. He through structure, she through control. In the end, Meghan's vision prevailed. The traditional uniform disappeared. The tone became informal, image-oriented, a home designed not for chaos, but for curation. Still, whispers among the staff grew uneasy. Is she really working hard? One asked quietly, after hearing Meghan describe herself as an overworked mother. The documents say they clock only 1 hour a week. Harry adapted, but insiders noticed the change. His once easy laughter turned softer, shorter, as if even joy required approval. The nanny began to sense that inside this modern castle, love itself had to be performed correctly. Among all the murmured conversations, one question surfaced, and nobody dared speak it aloud. During her months there, the nanny claimed something fell off. Despite being in constant proximity, she rarely witnessed what most homes overflow with: the small signs of expecting or raising children. There were no doctor visits, no maternity routines, no scattered signs of baby life. At first, she assumed privacy, but as time passed, confusion turned to quiet alarm. Staff whispered, looked down, changed the subject, and when public photos later appeared, photos showing what looked like pregnancy, the reactions behind closed doors were silent but telling. "I never saw what I was supposed to see," she reportedly said, and no one wanted to talk about it. When reminders came down from management to avoid certain topics, the air grew heavier. The unspoken rule was simple: some truths, real or imagined, must stay buried. For a woman whose image was built on authenticity, the contradictions were disorienting. Inside that pristine house, even curiosity felt dangerous. What are we protecting? The nanny wondered. Privacy or perception? Weeks became months, yet the feeling of absence deepened. The house was stunning, almost unreal. Flawless surfaces, perfect lighting, but missing something vital. There were no toys left out, no fingerprints on glass, no crayons, no signs of small life at all. She convinced herself the children stayed elsewhere, for safety. Yet on days when press reports mentioned family time, the rooms remained still. Meals were prepared and untouched. Playrooms stayed locked, as though staged for a scene rather than lived in. One housekeeper finally whispered what everyone was thinking: even what we're meant to believe here is managed. It was then the nanny's unease turned to certainty. The house wasn't a home, it was a performance. When the Sussexes' Netflix documentary premiered, she watched like millions of others. But for her, it was personal. The living spaces on screen didn't match her memory. Furniture, windows, even the direction of light seemed wrong. "That wasn't our house," she said to a former colleague. Scenes showed Meghan cuddling Archie, Harry laughing amid California sunshine. The footage looked tender, spontaneous, intimate. But to those who'd lived within those walls, the perfection looked uncanny. Too clean, too arranged. Each shot appeared polished for purpose. The colors, the framing, even the children's laughter. Everything too pristine, too cinematic. To outsiders, it was family joy. To insiders, it was production value. When credits rolled, the nanny sat frozen. That show, she whispered, wasn't documenting life. It was manufacturing it. She realized that working inside the Sussex residence had never been about caring for children. It was about maintaining an image so tightly wrapped that truth itself could barely breathe. By now, phones were forbidden, conversations restricted, and every visitor had to surrender devices at the door. Even casual friendliness among staff risked suspicion. Cameras watched not only hallways, but also gardens and staircases. Some whispered of microphones hidden in rooms, justified as security, but it didn't feel like safety. It felt like surveillance. People stopped confiding in one another. Greetings shortened to nods. A single wrong word could end a career. The nanny remembers walking through corridors, heavy with silence, thinking how strange it was that a home built for privacy felt like the least private place on earth. And as she prepared to leave, she began to understand that in this house, truth was never destroyed. It was simply edited. By the time she left the Sussex residence, the nanny said one truth had become impossible to ignore. Privacy inside that home wasn't protection. It was control. What began as security evolved into silent domination. Each conversation, each look, each whisper carried the weight of being overheard. Every visitor, cleaners, gardeners, even delivery drivers, had to pass through multiple checkpoints. Devices sealed in opaque pouches. Conversations monitored by security staff who never spoke. At first, she believed this was simply a royal standard. But over time, it felt different. Less about safety, more about keeping everyone inside the same invisible cage of obedience. Even Harry, once described as warm and approachable, seemed altered by the atmosphere. His laughter, once spontaneous, became rare, short, uncertain, as if even joy needed clearance. He carried a quiet weariness, a fatigue that mirrored everyone else's. The home that was, supposed to be an escape from palace pressure, now echoed, with a tension of its own making. And then came the moments that truly unsettled her. The so-called media preparation days. Every time cameras or photographers were scheduled to visit. The energy inside the house transformed overnight. Rooms that had sat untouched for weeks suddenly bloomed with color. Flowers appeared. Children's toys decorated chairs. And neatly folded blankets gave the illusion of domestic warmth. Family photographs that had never existed before would materialize on side tables. Everything, from lighting to the positioning of a toy bear, was arranged with precision, as though the house itself was auditioning for its own role. The nanny soon realized that this was not spontaneity. This was staging. It wasn't family life being lived. It was an image being built. And when she looked closer, she noticed something else. The silence. Even on those days, when the children were supposedly at home for photo sessions, there was no sound, no giggles, no running feet, no chatter echoing through hallways. Instead, Meghan would emerge, flawless, calm, and camera-ready, her smile unwavering, her movements deliberate. She knew her light, her angles, her cues. To onlookers, the moment looked like a natural family portrait. But to the nanny, it felt like watching an actress perform motherhood rather than live it. She remembered one day vividly, a private family shoot on the grounds. Staff were told the children were inside, resting, yet the house remained still. Hours later, new photos surfaced online showing Meghan, Harry, and their children feeding hens in a sunlit garden. The nanny and others looked at each other in disbelief. They hadn't seen or heard anything remotely resembling that moment. The setting looked familiar, but the children didn't. Whispers rippled through the staff quarters. Some wondered aloud whether scenes were recreated elsewhere for public release, using carefully controlled environments. Others refused to speak at all. One thing was clear. What the world saw on screen was not what they saw behind closed doors. Each image, each headline, each tender clip seemed less like a glimpse of family intimacy and more like a campaign that sold peace, authenticity, and brand identity all at once. To the nanny, it became obvious that this wasn't about deception in the malicious sense. It was about narrative, about controlling every thread of how the world perceived them. In that pursuit, real life had become secondary to its reflection. Over time, the home grew quieter still. Conversations between staff were reduced to essentials. Greetings became whispers. Every person understood the unspoken rule. Privacy belonged only to one person. Everyone else was just passing through a set built to look like sanctuary. And yet, even amid the unease, the nanny said she felt something unexpected. A sadness. For behind the staged perfection and guarded smiles, she glimpsed two people trying to maintain control over a story that was slipping away from them. Fame, scrutiny, trauma, it all collided behind those walls. She believed Meghan had convinced herself that control equaled peace, that if every angle, every statement, every shot could be managed, the chaos of the outside world would stay away. But what she built instead, the nanny said, was a cage, a beautiful, gilded one. Harry, meanwhile, seemed caught between worlds. His royal upbringing demanding structure, his new life demanding surrender. He had escaped the palace, only to enter another one, quieter but equally confining. As the nanny's final weeks approached, she described feeling a constant tension between truth and illusion. Even the simplest moments, mealtime, bedtime, a walk through the garden, felt rehearsed, as though performed for an invisible audience. She would catch herself pausing mid-task, wondering which version of reality she was helping maintain. Then came the Netflix premiere. Sitting alone, she watched the glossy documentary unfold. To the world, it was a touching portrait of freedom and love. But to her, it was a work of fiction stitched from fragments of reality. She recognized furniture that didn't exist. Scenes filmed in rooms with reversed layouts. Sunlight falling from impossible angles. The children on screen looked perfect. Healthy, happy, adored. Yet for those who had lived inside that house, even those images raised quiet doubts. The footage, they said, looked curated down to the last detail. It felt like a commercial, she murmured, not a confession, and that realization chilled her more than anything. Because if the story being told to millions wasn't real, what was left of the truth? Working there, she concluded, was less about caring for children and more about preserving illusion. The job, she said, wasn't raising kids. It was raising an image. Even when she left, the experience haunted her. She would catch herself whispering before speaking, checking rooms for cameras that weren't there. Privacy had become a reflexive fear. Still, she insisted her story wasn't born of bitterness. It was, in her words, a warning about what happens when authenticity becomes a product. She didn't speak out for revenge, but for release, to describe what it feels like to live in a world where every breath might become a headline. Her words, when finally shared, drew gasps, not because they were cruel, but because they were quiet, measured, human. She didn't accuse. She described, and what she described wasn't hatred. It was heartbreak. She spoke of the way sincerity can vanish behind curated perfection, of how people, even those with the best intentions, can lose themselves when image becomes their oxygen. For all the glamour, for all the polished appearances, she said, the most haunting thing inside that home wasn't scandal. It was silence. In the end, her account left listeners with a single uncomfortable question. When do stories stop informing us and start protecting the people who wrote them? Maybe Meghan believed in the version she presented to the world. Maybe Harry needed it too, to feel that the chaos had purpose, that their exile meant something. But for those who lived behind the scenes, the performance was relentless. Each smile rehearsed, each statement pre-cleared, each gesture measured for optics. And while the world debated rumors, inside those walls, the air grew heavier, with the one thing that couldn't be photographed: truth. When she finally stepped away, the nanny didn't take souvenirs or documents, only memories. Memories of quiet corridors, untouched playrooms, carefully positioned cameras, and the persistent sound of nothing. She sometimes wondered whether she'd imagined it all, whether perhaps she'd misunderstood a family struggling under impossible scrutiny. But then she'd remember the locked doors, the NDAs, the ever-watching eyes, and she'd know she hadn't imagined the feeling that real life had been edited out of existence. As time passed, new reports and documentaries surfaced, each claiming to tell the real story. But to her, none of them did. They were all echoes of the same performance. Versions of truth
that no
packaged
PR
for
team
comfort.
can spin away. If the Sussex
She
family
never
life was
revealed every
truly so
detail.
perfect, why did those
Some
who lived
things,
inside its
she
walls
said,
feel like
were too
outsiders
strange
looking
to
in?
repeat.
And just when you
But
think
what
you've heard
she
it
did
all,
share
wait until you
painted
hear
a
what she says
picture
about
not of
Archie and
villains,
Lilibet.
The
but of
nanny that the
people
couple have
consumed
been
by the
relying
machinery
on
of their
for
own
some
myth.
time
And
wants
in that,
out.
perhaps,
Because according to
lies
her,
the
that's
deepest
where the story
tragedy.
turns from
That
strange to
two
shocking.
people who
Before the
sought
nanny
freedom
ever
from
stepped foot
control
inside the Sussex
had
mansion, the
recreated
job
it for
description
themselves.
alone made her pause.
This
It
time
wasn't a
without a
royal
crown,
listing. It read
but
more
with
like a
the same
casting call.
suffocating
Every word
weight
was
of
precise,
expectation.
every requirement oddly personal.
Her
Meghan,
story
she was told,
closes
wanted a
with the line
caregiver
that
who was
lingers.
discreet, adaptable,
I
and not
didn't work for a
distracting.
family.
Translation:
I
someone
worked for a
competent but not
fantasy.
too noticeable.
And
Rumor among
fantasies
staff suggested
always
Meghan
end
didn't
the
want
same
anyone
way.
in her home who could
Quietly,
outshine the brand.
beautifully,
Candidates whispered
and
that
alone.
looks, social
In her
presence,
final
even
reflection,
relationship status
she
were
admits
quietly
she doesn't know
scrutinized.
the full
Meghan Markle
truth.
and Prince Harry had
Maybe
got through
some of what
3
she saw
nannies
was
in just
misinterpreted.
6 weeks.
Maybe
and
the
that's
children were
because
simply
working
kept hidden
for
for
this
protection.
couple is
Maybe the
incredibly
silence was
difficult.
just
A
the
nanny
price
with
of
her
fame.
own children?
But
Too
still,
complicated. Someone
she
in a
can't shake
relationship?
the
Too
echo of
risky.
that
The
house.
message was clear.
The
Your
way it
entire
hummed
life
with
must
quiet
orbit around
performance.
Meghan's. The job
way
didn't just
even
demand
laughter seemed
professionalism,
to wait
it
for
demanded
permission.
devotion. Calls
She
for
says the
flexibility
world
weren't
should
about
hear her not
schedules,
to
but about
condemn,
loyalty.
but to
Late-night requests,
understand
constant
how easily
availability,
real
and
lives
zero
can
personal
become
privacy became
productions.
unspoken
When
expectations.
cameras are always
What should have
waiting,
been a family
how
role
truth,
felt more like
once
serving in a
filtered
private
through
institution
branding,
where one
loses
wrong
its
word could end
heartbeat.
everything.
And
Even
perhaps
stranger,
that's the real
applicants were told the
revelation.
children's
Not
access
the
was on Meghan's
scandals,
terms only.
not the
No
rumors,
clear hours,
but
no
the
casual
silence that
affection,
follows
no
them.
natural bonding.
Because
Just order,
sometimes
silence,
the
and
stories
precision.
we're shown
The nanny
aren't
almost
made
turned
to
it down
reveal
until
anything at
curiosity
all.
got the better
They're
of
made
her.
to keep
Because
the
beneath all
audience
those
believing.
polished instructions,
Her
one line stood
experience
out.
remains
All
her
activities
own.
within the
Part
residence
memory,
are subject to
part
observation.
mystery,
She didn't realize
part
how literal
warning.
that warning
But
truly
one
was.
thing,
Once the
she
agency
insists,
creates a list
will
of
never
potential
fade.
hires, you
The
meet with that
haunting
nanny.
quiet
Then
of
you have
that
to meet with
perfect
another one of
California
Meghan's
home,
assistants. These
where
are 2
even the
separate
walls seemed to know
auditions.
they
Then
were
you
being
sign an
watched.
NDA,
And as
which
she
grants
steps
you
away from that
access to
world,
Harry and Meghan. So
she
this is
leaves
the
behind
3rd
not
interview.
accusations,
When the nanny arrived at the
but a
Sussex
question
property,
that
she
still hangs
expected
in
an
the
interview,
air.
not an
What
audition
happens when
under surveillance.
authenticity
From the
itself
moment she stepped
becomes
through
a
the door,
brand?
something
And when
felt
love,
off. The home was
privacy,
immaculate, but
and
eerily
truth
quiet,
are
as if
just
every
scenes
sound
in
had been
someone
carefully
else's
rehearsed.
story.
She was told
Because
to go about a
behind the
normal trial
smiles,
day, tending
the
to the
speeches,
environment, observing
and
routines,
the crafted
staying
perfection,
relaxed. What no one
one
mentioned
sound
was that
still
every
echoes
movement,
through
every
those
gesture was
immaculate halls. It isn't laughter. It isn't music. It's silence, steady, unbroken, and unforgettable.